Latitude Media, podcast at the frontier of climate technology.
I'm Shail Khan, and this is Catalyst.
I actually did go to try to get one installed, and then the whole, classic story around heat pump adoption on that side really hit me, where I had to talk to multiple people to even find a contractor who would sell me one. Like, most people wouldn't even sell me a heat pump when I wanted it.
This week, figuring out the right way to do heat pumps.
Artificial intelligence is one of the biggest stories in energy right now, from the AI-based solutions for the grid to the unprecedented load growth caused in part by the AI boom. On December 3rd in Washington, D.C., Latitude Media is bringing together a range of experts for Transition AI 2024, a one-day conference on the AI energy nexus. We'll have networking, panels, a workshop, and technical presentations, and our podcast listeners get a 10% discount off their tickets. Use the code LMPODS10 when you check out. Head on over to latitudemedia.com/events or click the link in the show notes to see the full agenda and register for Transition AI 2024. Catalyst is brought to you by Energy Hub. Facing urgent load growth, it's time for utilities to rally behind VPPs as a solution to diverse grid challenges. Energy Hub helps utilities quickly scale VPPs to manage load growth, maximize the value of renewables, and deliver flexibility at every level of the grid. How do they do it? Energy Hub's software and services enable grid-aware VPP management across distributed resource classes through a best-in-class Edge DERMS platform. Accelerate a reliable, affordable, and decarbonized energy system today at energyhub.com.
I'm Shail Khan. I invest in revolutionary climate technologies at Energy Impact Partners. Welcome. All right, so bit of a personal story as a segue into this episode. So I live in Berkeley, as many of you know. I moved into this house in 2018. We bought the house. And when we were looking at the house, we learned that there is no central heating or air conditioning. In fact, there's basically no heating or air conditioning at all when we moved into it. The house was built in 1910, and we were still pretty new to the area. And so my wife and I thought, wow, maybe Berkeley is the only climate in the country that requires neither heating nor air conditioning at any time. So we bought the house. We, of course, pretty quickly learned that's not true. Even in Berkeley, California, you definitely need heating, and it's nice to have air conditioning as well. So for a while, we made do with room heaters and things like that. And then my wife got pregnant and we were expecting a child, and we realized that that's not really going to work in a baby's room. And so we need to actually get mini splits. And so we went through the process. This is now in 2021 of getting heat pumps installed. We got a heat pump made by an unnamed Asian manufacturer, large company. I won't name them for the sake of what I'm about to tell you. And 2 mini splits, and got it all installed in 2021. And I got to tell you, that experience explained very well to me why the heat pump market has not taken off more than it has. Now, of course, it is growing, but it's not really in that inflection point of growth yet. And at least from my N of one personal experience, I understand why. It was more expensive than I expected it to be. It was a really poor sales experience. The installation was kind of messy. And then, of course, the unit itself kind of sucked. The controls were difficult. It broke all the time. It was not a good experience for me. And despite the fact that I was excited that I had a heat pump finally, it has always made me a little bit more skeptical of this market. So fast forward, and my firm, Energy Impact Partners, invested in a company called Quilt, which is trying to basically change that entire process. Everything from how you buy heat pumps to the actual product itself and the user experience thereof. It's a vertically integrated strategy. It's a big swing at heat pump world. So when we invested in Quilt, I realized this was an opportunity for me to see if it really could be done different. And so as of a couple of weeks ago, I am customer, I believe, number 7 of Quilt. I got my Quilt installed. It replaced the other unit that I already had. And without giving you a sales pitch for it, it was a dramatically different experience. And every step along the way, including through to today when they're just running in my house, it's just very, very different. And I think it is easy to underappreciate how much room there is to innovate in sectors like HVAC. And this is important, obviously, because heat pumps are a big lever in building decarbonization. Residential heat pumps in particular is not a lot you could do that's bigger in decarbonizing homes other than maybe installing solar or maybe buying yourself an electric vehicle and charging. So I wanted to have Paul Lambert, who's the CEO and co-founder of Quilt, on, not to talk to me so much about my experience, but rather to talk about what he learned about the HVAC market, about the heat pump market, and how those lessons are getting adopted in trying to build a different version of a customer experience. All right, here's Paul. Paul, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, so I want to talk about, actually, let me ask you this. When did you start looking into heat pump world? How long ago was that?
Very end of 2021. I was on paternity leave and I was trying to figure out how I was going to get into climate tech. And I saw this tweet that was about how heat pumps are the sort of unsung hero, sleeper hit climate solution. And I just went down the rabbit hole and I haven't come back.
Okay, so you're still relatively fresh eyes on this, 3 years in now, more or less, to thinking about this sector. I guess I'm interested, as you started digging in, going down that rabbit hole in the first place, what were your observations at that time around the heat pump market? Either the products that you were seeing out there or how they were getting installed and sold and adopted?
Yeah, it did start with the product. So I started Googling heat pumps, probably the same thing as everyone else. And I found these, mini splits. I didn't know what that was. I had to look it up. That's a new concept for people who haven't either had it as an AC before or are new to heat pumps, because you can't make a fossil fuel mini split. It just doesn't make sense. And it kind of struck me right away that these things could potentially be really cool, but they were really ugly. And it being really cool, you could control each temperature in every room, and that was something I was struggling with. We had a newborn at home, and we were honestly stressing about the temperature in that room. You're not allowed to put blankets in the room or in the crib with the baby, so you're always really controlling the temperature of that room, and the whole rest of the house will suffer. And I spent most of my career making consumer technology, and it just kind of jumped out at me as something that had kind of been not really looked at in a couple decades. It kind of felt like a relic of the late 20th century product design. So that's what first jumped out at me. And then I actually did go to try to get one installed. And then the whole, classic story around heat pump adoption on that side really hit me, where I had to talk to multiple people to even find a contractor who would sell me one. Most people wouldn't even sell me a heat pump when I wanted it.
Right. So I think you're getting to the, two of the common complaints about heat pump market as it stands today, which is both the product is for various reasons kind of mediocre, and the second is that it's actually hard to get it installed, and installers, HVAC technicians, generally don't want to give you a heat pump even if you want one for a variety of reasons. So okay, you spend a bunch of time, you learn about this market. I guess I want to talk about how it is structured today, and that'll segue into how it could be better. But maybe let's step back at the high level. Can you walk me through the value chain of the heat pump market as it exists today? Who are the big players and how do they interact in the ecosystem?
Yeah, so I'll also focus on residential heat pumps because for heating and cooling, because I think most people on the pod know that heat pumps are technically just everywhere, right? They're in cars, they're in fridges, they're in tons of commercial applications. So for residential heat pumps, they are... There's sort of the central AC, and there's kind of the large American brands people will know there that they've been producing them for a while, Carrier and Trane and companies like that. With the mini split market, it tends to be pretty dominated by Asian brands. So a lot of Japanese companies, Mitsubishi, Daikin, Fujitsu are all quite popular. LG, Samsung all make them as well. So there's also some Chinese companies, Gree and Midea. Those are sort of the big players. And yeah, the way it works is they have factories in Asia that produce these products at very, very high volume for a global market. And then they're sold to distributors in each country, very large ones in the US. And so there's kind of a markup there that happens. And then the distributor will go on and sell it to end contractors who will hold the inventory. And then the contractors will go and sell that on to the end homeowner. And at each stage of that chain, of course, there's a markup on the pricing. And the final, package of goods and services that the homeowner is buying is the labor, the hardware, and the materials. So there's the hardware that might have the brand on it. There's materials, line set covers, all this stuff that you don't think about, but is actually a big part of it. And then the labor is pretty significant as well. So that's kind of that's the full value chain today and kind of the standard industry.
That's a good segue actually into the question of the cost stack. For a typical homeowner today who wants to get, I don't know, it obviously depends how many units you're getting and so on, but say you're getting a couple mini splits or 3 or 4 mini splits, you pick your amount. getting installed from scratch. Like, to a first order, how much of the cost is the heat pump versus all the other stuff? This is one thing I remember in the early days of residential solar, people often did not appreciate, and that has like reared its ugly head in a substantial fashion over time, which is people would look at the trajectory of the cost of solar panels. They'd be like, oh, solar is getting really cheap. And it turns out it's not. In fact, in the US in particular, residential solar is still ridiculously expensive, despite the fact that panels have gotten very cheap, because most of the cost is outside the panel. It's either other hardware or, more importantly, it's the soft costs, the permitting, the installation labor, all that kind of stuff. So is that a similar dynamic in heat pumps?
It is. It's a very similar dynamic, and it's not quite as dramatic because the costs are not dropping at the same pace they were on the panels. But when I look at the three big cost drivers to our final costs, so labor, materials, like non-hardware materials, and our hardware, they're actually in that order in terms of size. So we spend the most on labor, the second most on materials. So I'm talking about like line sets and mounting brackets and things. And then the third on our actual hardware, the thing that says Quilt on it, the stuff that says Quilt on it, the dial, the indoor unit, the outdoor unit. And that was really surprising for me as well. So that's the same structure of the industry. The relative cost of the heat pump itself it's small. It's probably 20% or so of the overall cost. And there's actually a mistake I think some people make where they Google mini split and they'll find they'll go to HVAC Direct or something online and they're like, oh, I can buy this Mitsubishi for $1,500 for the indoor and the outdoor unit. Like, why is this guy trying to sell it to me for $7K? Well, it turns out $7K is actually a fair price because that's actually those, you have to add the materials and the labor and then everything else associated with it. So,
I mean, to be honest with you, I'm not that surprised that labor is number one. I am surprised that materials are number two. Is that just because, so it's line sets and stuff like that? Is that just because that's like commodity? I'm trying to think what that entails and what if it could be high margin for somebody, or is it just that, people's houses are big and so the line sets are a bunch of, you tell me what they're made out of, but like a bunch of aluminum or whatever that like you have to buy enough of it that there's no way to drive those costs down or something?
Yeah, it's both those things. So there are certain pieces that are extremely high margins and the distributors are just making a lot of money on. And there are other parts that are literally just got really expensive, like copper in particular. Copper is expensive. The line sets are mostly copper. And, one of the downsides, I guess, of the ductless architecture is you are piping every room to an outdoor unit versus a central system. You have one central system that's being piped out to the outdoor unit. So you do use more copper. And that is the biggest one of the materials. But there's a lot of others as well. The line hide cover. So this means you have the line set on the side of the house. It's kind of this bundle of copper wires and data and power and stuff. You hide it with this thing that looks like a gutter. It's literally like a plastic gutter. Is typical distributors today, if you go at kind of retail, if you're a contractor, you're going to go buy it from one of the big distributors, you're paying about $25 a foot for that line hide. We've been able to source it from China for less than $1 a foot. The exact same product. So there are certain items like that are just kind of crazy expensive, and then there's these others that are just legitimately costly.
Okay, that's interesting because my reaction was going to be that I assume there's probably a lot you can do to reduce labor costs, and I want to talk about what some of those things might be because this was also has been a big focus in solar and other spaces. Like, what can you do to leverage modern technology to drive down those costs? But the question from a cost perspective is really how much can you drive down those other two categories of costs? And if you had asked me, I would have said, well, probably there's a fair bit you could do on the heat pump itself, but actually not much on those other materials. But it sounds like you think actually there is a bunch of headroom in the other materials.
I do, and I think it's one of the advantages of my company is vertically integrated in that we have those relationships overseas, and we can play the role of the distributor in certain cases, and then get those cost advantages and bring them through to the contracting side of the business, or our contractor partners. We can help them source lower cost supplies. But yeah, if you were to look at those three buckets, those cost drivers, and which ones we're going to have the biggest improvement on over the next 2-3 years, it's the materials.
What about labor? To a first order, my assumption would be that the cost of labor is mostly dictated by the number of truck rolls that you're doing out to a given house. Am I right about that? Or is it more how much time it takes to do the installation once everybody's on site?
Both. So, some jobs are a lot larger than others. And it does motivate us to do larger jobs. The other component is also the site visit. So there's the installation, but there's also the visit that usually happens before the installation happens. And there's a lot of people working on trying to make that more virtual, including us in certain scenarios, but we're not there yet. And I mean as an industry, not just as a company, where we can do virtual site visits and then not, have it be good enough quality that you're not paying the price with the one. Yeah.
Totally. I think this is one thing that people assume is going to be easier than it actually is. And not to over-reference solar, but it did work in solar mostly. But in solar, you have a pretty easy, the thing that had to be invented, Sungevity was really the company, was the first to pioneer this, right? Was use geospatial imagery, use satellite imagery to map out the roof, look at whether there are trees blocking and providing shade, and you can get a pretty good approximation based on the square footage of the home, what the power demand is going to be, and based on the roof from above, how much solar you're going to be able to put there. That's relatively straightforward. Having gone through the experience now twice with heat pumps, I can tell you there's a variety of things that are way more complicated about the heat pumps than solar that I can't quite picture how you could solve without a truck roll to my house. There's a questionnaire you could ask me, but it would be kind of a annoying process for me, and I wouldn't trust my answers anyway. So, I mean, I guess I can see why we're not there yet on a totally virtual quote that is trustworthy on heat pumps. It's not clear to me whether we can ever get there. Do you think there's a way we get there ultimately, or is this just a folly of a thing? Because there are a lot of people trying to do it or talking about it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be a good Silicon Valley tech entrepreneur if I could say that it's impossible, right? There's got to be some tech that could be invented. But the way we're thinking about it is, you get a classification of sort of difficulty of jobs. So if it's a home that maybe it was built as part of development housing, we've actually already installed in that house. So we can, the same sort of plan, but it's just a different version of that plan. And maybe it was an easy install and it's just all external walls. And we have these sort of confidence drivers that could make it kind of a class 1. And then we feel like there's a class there that we will be able to get to virtual installs pretty quickly. Another, if it's a single room, single zone, one heat pump, exterior wall, those are usually pretty easy. But the difficulty level can get really, really high. We've seen some crazy installs with San Francisco, Victorians, row houses that you're going through a 100-year-old structure, multiple levels, neighbors on both sides. I do not see how you're ever going to do that virtually, at least not with some pretty good robots and X-ray vision.
Right. What about so that's how do you reduce the number of truck rolls before you install the thing? Where is there headroom in the installation labor itself? What can you do to drive that down?
Yeah, I think that there is going to be, so we've actually already done some in that we made the unit quite light. So you can, one person can do it as opposed to two. And that's a huge deal. We have also, if you look at where a lot of the cost is, it's, when it comes to kind of in-wall installations, that's a very complicated one. So meaning you have to run the line set through the wall versus on the outside of the building. And there might just be smarter design things we can do there. Either create a line height that doesn't bother people in any way and is actually pretty invisible so more people are willing to do the outside wall, or we just talk to the homeowner at a time where they're already going to be doing some renovation or have their walls open. I don't see any silver bullet there, to be honest. I think it is a series of iterations of looking at the pain points, where are the hot spots, solving them. It's almost like optimizing software in a way, right? You just kind of look at the whole process and figure out where you can make the biggest impact. And luckily, we're early enough in our journey that I think there's still a lot of headroom on the table. So I am expecting to see improvements there, but it will start to plateau eventually, unless there's some radical technology change that we can bring to the table. For example, not having a pipe refrigerant at all. Imagine that was something we could do. That would be a huge reduction driver.
Where are you going to be on December 3rd? I know where I'm going to be. I'm going to be in Washington, D.C. at Transition AI 2024. That's when Latitude Media is offering the chance to hear from experts on the front lines of AI deployment in the energy sector. Transition AI 2024 is our one-day in-person event, again in Washington, D.C. It addresses both sides of the AI energy nexus, the challenges AI energy demand poses for the grid, and the wide opportunities to help climate solutions. This is our third event, and we brought together a really great lineup for this year. It includes Meta's former Director of Energy Strategy strategy Peter Freed, DOE's chief AI officer Helena Fu, Paige Crahan, who heads up Tapestry, Google X's moonshot for the grid, and AES chief product officer Chris Shelton, plus many more. And our podcast listeners get a 10% discount. Use the code LMPODS10, that's Latitude Media, LMPODS10 when you check out. See the full agenda and register today at latitudemedia.com/events, or just click the link in the show notes. I will be there. I hope to see you there. Transition AI 2024. Catalyst is brought to you by Energy Hub. Energy Hub unlocks the power of VPPs to deliver flexibility to the grid. How do they do it? By enrolling DERs in customer-centric flexibility programs and using AI-driven optimizations across devices to shape desired load profiles. Energy Hub has more gigawatts under management than any other edge DERMs on the market, and they have a proven track record of building high-performing VPPs in record time. Working with more than 70 utility clients across North America, Energy Hub delivers reliable flexibility at every level of the grid. Click the link in the show notes to learn more, or go to energyhub.com.
All right. So we talked a little bit about what you could do on the cost side. I guess I want to talk about the customer experience side. That's where I think, I mean, you already mentioned that, like, what you identified early on was the product could have a better customer experience. And I want to come back to that. But before we do, let's continue on this like sales process part. That clearly can generate a better customer experience. I mean, certainly relative to your experience and actually my experience as well, originally trying to get a heat pump, of like calling around to local HVAC technicians who were like reticent to sell you one in the first place. So we should probably explain why that is. So maybe start with like, why do traditional HVAC technicians not want to sell heat pumps often? And then second, just generally speaking, what has been your thesis on like, how do you deliver a really good customer experience? Or maybe the other way to put it in more financial terms, like, how do you reduce the pipeline fallout rate? How do you make sure that people who start the process finish the process?
Yeah, so we'll start with the beginning one, which is like, why is it the way it is today? And I have a bunch of theories. I don't know if anyone knows exactly why, but I'm going to start with the assumption that contractors are good people who want to do right by their customers and they want to grow their business, but there's no sort of like malicious intent out there. So contractors are generally representing a few brands, and some brands have made more investments in certain product categories than others. For example, the sort of more American brands, like the Carriers of the world, have been very into the central systems, and those do work a little bit better with, I think, the furnaces are more inherent to the central system because you can't get a ductless furnace, as I said earlier. When if you're carrying a Mitsubishi or Fujitsu brand, you might be more willing to sort of say you should go that way if you're doing the ductless. That's one thing. There is the cost is a real thing. So like central heat pumps, if we're just to say compare it with a furnace, are still generally more expensive up front. And we haven't done a good job of capturing or communicating energy saving introductions. And the reality is it's a super complex story, especially in somewhere like California, where electricity prices are high and it's not that cold.
Right. I mean, the savings, yeah, I want to come back to that question of like what the actual economics to customers look like. But I guess what you're saying at this point is like the communication, mostly if you just call an HVAC technician, is they're like, well, okay, I could get you this thing, or I can get you this heat pump, but the heat pump's going to be twice as expensive. And there's not like a clean way to say, but over 10 years, you're going to save some money.
And then I think that's the most common one in California that you hear is like, well, why would you pay more for this thing? Like I'll save you way more money. There's also just the maturity of the distribution system. And like the furnaces on the back of my truck, I'm gonna have to order you a heat pump. I'll get it for you in 2 months. There's kind of the availability thing if they're not carrying it. And there's also, I think, just the industry catching up with both the state of technology and consumer demand. So some people might still say things like the heat pump don't work well in the cold. I've had people in California, so again, very, very mild climate. I don't know how cold it gets in Berkeley, but it never gets below 40 in Redwood City. And being told here that they need to have a dual fuel system for when it gets cold,
really?
Which is just kind of absurd.
Yeah. I mean, my retired parents in Wisconsin were told that, but that makes a little more sense.
Yeah, for sure. I think if you're somewhere, anyway, yes, there are parts of the country that make sense. They're getting fewer and fewer, but they do exist. It's certainly not the West Coast of California or really any coastal city in America at this point, in my view. And then there's the additional thing of just the inertia. Sort of, people, if you've been installing and doing something for 20 years and you built your business doing that, you're probably going to keep doing it. So, and that's true for anyone.
Okay, so that's maybe why it's sort of still a little hard for a lot of people to get a unit sold to them, surprisingly enough. But what's been your thesis on like what's an ideal customer experience, sales experience look like for a heat pump?
Yeah, well, and I'll also say that the whole industry here feels kind of stuck in the 20th century to me. And what I mean by that is that it hasn't had the internet be a fundamental building block in how it thinks about the sales process and distribution system. So the reason that everything has so many steps, the value chain I described before, is that it wasn't possible for a consumer to just talk to a manufacturer and order a product. And you saw the same thing happen in cars, of course, right? With really Tesla being the major first brand to skip the dealership because they could build that direct-to-consumer relationship. And because the internet allows you to do that. It also allows you to skip travel agents and lots of other examples, right? Where once you bake it in, you can simplify the value chain. So I think the ideal customer experience probably for a lot of people does start on the internet, where you do some research. You're probably Googling it anyways to figure out what a heat pump is and what's a good product to buy, what's good for my house. You can get a fair quote. You can actually see what it's going to cost for your home, or at least get a pretty good sense, something that a company will stand behind. You get a sense of the product, so you actually know what it might look like in your home. You get a sense of something you want or not, which is funny to say, but actually a lot of these contractors, you actually don't even see the product you're going to get until it's installed. Right, you might see a picture online, but it's really not a big part of the experience. And I really think like if you think of the best buying experiences someone has in their life, sort of lowest friction, highest trust journeys from other parts of their life, what would that be applied to heat pumps? So I think, for low-cost purchases, there's kind of these like Amazon type things. But for higher-cost purchases, I do think the auto industry is a pretty good one on the consumer side to mirror, and that's what we've tried to do at Qualt.
Is there a distinction? I guess the other thing that people talk about, and one of the challenges for heat pumps relative to something like solar. So solar, you can kind of do anytime. The only real constraint on that is like, is your roof nearly at the end of life, and you're going to need to do a roof replacement soon anyway. But otherwise, like you could just add solar. Same thing with an EV, right? There's no time specific constraint on it, except I guess if you need a new vehicle immediately. But HVAC is a little different because at least central units, you think, okay, yes, you can rip and replace your existing boiler or whatever. But most of the time, my understanding is that purchase behavior occurs when it's a replacement cycle thing. So it only comes up once every 10 years or whatever it is. And even more so, sometimes it comes when something breaks and then you need something immediately. Is that as true with mini splits as it is with central units? I could imagine it not being quite as true there.
Well, why? What's your hypothesis there? What are you imagining?
I don't know. Well, maybe I'm just like reflecting my own personal experience. That's an interesting question, which is we were in this old house that didn't have central HVAC and we just needed to add it, but it wasn't like an immediate overnight thing. But we did need to do it. And actually, it was exactly the same situation as you, where we did it we bought this house. We had a few years with no HVAC whatsoever other than some like room units. And then my wife got pregnant and we were like, oh, we're going to have a newborn. We probably should figure out a way to keep his room the right temperature. And that was what caused us to do it. And admittedly, then we did have a time constraint. So maybe I'm arguing against my own thing, but no, I could imagine, I don't know why, that maybe like mini splits are less of a episodic purchase behavior.
Yeah, they are. There's another way in, right? Because some people will look to just solve a part of the room or a part of the home. Sorry. So you can progressively adopt mini splits, which is not something you do with a central system. You can start with the office. You can start with just the baby's room, see how you like it. And then when the furnace goes out in 2 years, you already have these 2 or 3 mini splits you like. You're like, let's just put 3 more in and I've got the whole house covered. So that is a entrance, an angle to adoption that doesn't exist for central systems. I also, so this kind of emergency replacement, it's called a distressed HVAC purchase. On the heating side, it's roughly 50% of the market today. So it's like their furnace dies, that's where they'll get it. On the cooling side, it's less than a quarter. And that's because cooling is still more of a luxury to people. And if your AC goes out, usually, unless you're in the middle of a heat wave in somewhere like Arizona, but usually it's something you can kind of get by with. And you're willing to do a little bit more of a considered shopping journey around.
And in the markets that you're going after, in the markets that are higher penetration heat pump markets, is it predominantly cooling or heating? I guess I hadn't thought about the purchase behavior as being different for heating versus cooling because these units do both.
Yeah, they are. And in fact, the cooling is a really great kind of Trojan horse in for the heating side. So a lot of people, especially on the West Coast, maybe not so much Southern California, but really Northern California all the way up to Seattle, are adding cooling. The world is getting warmer. And there's a lot of people out there shopping for cooling. And when they learn that these systems can then also do heating, they'll either turn off their central system or just when they get, whenever the furnace dies, they'll just stop using it. But for us, it's actually primarily cooling right where we are right now, which is the Bay Area.
Is that part of the vision for you to ultimately have mini splits replace central units? Like maybe these are customers who do have a central HVAC system that provides heating. You are the Trojan horse with cooling with mini splits. But then ultimately they just say, okay, like I'm not going to replace my boiler whatsoever. I'm just add a bunch more room units.
Yes. Well, I should say that I think 60%, we actually just pulled the stat. It's about 60% of our customers are coming from a central ducted system. So it's over half of all our customers are abandoning a central heating and cooling system. And by abandoning, I should say upgrading to a ductless system. But a lot of the rebates are predicated on removing the fossil system. And so we actually have to take photos of it, the furnace there and then the furnace not being there and the nameplate and in order to get the rebates. So what often happens is someone comes to us for cooling and they're like, oh, well, actually, yeah, I guess my furnace is like 9 years old, 12 years old, whatever. It's going to go pretty soon. You're saying I get an extra $2,000 off the price if we just pull it out? Let's do that. And that's usually what happens. And so one of our top company metrics that we literally report every Tuesday and we report to the board is dead furnaces. We have a furnace graveyard and we are very proud of every time that we pull a fossil system out of a home. And it's one of our key metrics.
Let's talk a little bit more about the product side. Obviously, I'm going to list a bunch of things the levers that you can pull on the product. Obviously, you want to make all of them amazing, but I'm interested in sort of your rank order of like what you think really matters to customers. So there's upfront cost, there's CapEx, there's efficiency, the efficiency of the unit, there's the visual UI, I guess the product design is the way to put that. And then there's the user experience of it, which includes, in your case, you have a dial and an app and so on. Which of these do you think, do you have a sense yet as to what is really, because the goal here is ultimately to dramatically expand the heat pump market. So like what is going to drive, if you have to rank order, what's going to drive sales through the roof? Which of those things do you think is what really drives behavior?
Yeah, so I'd like to go back to just what are the problems? Like what are the problems that people are struggling with? And then how do we solve those problems? And then at the top, what drives into the funnel? And then once they're in the funnel, what are the other problems they're encountering? So the things that are driving people in are they want to be comfortable in their home, which is obvious to say. This is why people are going out and buying cooling, right? And if their furnace goes out or whatever, or if they have the baby coming, they need to get heating, and then a cost, of course, as well, right? So that's kind of the next step in it. But if they need to buy something, they generally don't want to spend as little money as possible to get as much value as possible, and of course that does vary a fair bit by market segments, and people are more cost conscious than others, and what we have focused on is trying to drive those two value drivers as much as we can. So, and the way we do that is less on the CapEx side, but more on the OpEx side. So really focusing on efficiency and trying to build an extremely efficient system. And I'm very proud to say that I think we've done that. And then on the comfort side, that's where a lot of those other things you mentioned come into it. So just the ductless system inherently is more comfortable because you get this room by room control, right? You can control the baby's temperature room different than the room you're in. And by having low frictions ways for people to express their intent, so setting schedules, having a dial interface that they're comfortable using, and it's not like this Byzantine remote with 80 buttons on it. Just like those little product design things actually increase the realization of the efficiency and comfort because you're lowering the friction to use the product. And then once you get in, but then the other thing is like why we focus on product design is we just did a bunch of research earlier, given that we know that these ductless systems inherently have all these great attributes of efficiency and comfort. Why aren't people buying them? The aesthetics are a big part of it. People don't want the big white kind of cheap looking appliance boxes all over their houses. So we needed to find a way to create an object that people would actually be like proud of. So right now people are assigning almost like negative value to it. So like it's going to lower the cost of my house by having these all over the place because they're kind of ugly. We want to create something that's going to add positive value. It's going to increase the value. People are going to excited to show it to their friends and family when they come over. So the aesthetics are a really big part of it because of this kind of squishy world of brand experience and pride of ownership, which is very real, and especially when it comes to someone's home.
All right, so you mentioned the OpEx benefit and getting a really high efficiency system, which I guess is a good segue for me into this topic of like actual customer economics. Do customers, I mean, this is very location specific, but let's just say in Northern California and the places you're installing, do customers save money ultimately? I mean, is it an economic value proposition yet? It certainly will be over time, I think. Well, I guess it depends where electricity prices relative to natural gas prices go, but yeah.
Yeah, without knowing the prices of electricity and natural gas today and exactly where we're installing, and honestly even the home itself, like how it's structured. Like, does it have a highly inefficient central system that uses a ton of gas to keep the house warm? It's just really, really hard to answer. But in general, places where the electricity is,
it's the spark spread. It's the delta between electricity and natural gas prices.
Yeah, it's the spark spread, exactly. Yeah. Thank you. You're better at this. You talk about this a lot more than I do, but that is going to be the biggest single driver. But that said, we've just hung our hat on knowing that like within the heat pump category, if we can make it more efficient, that is just good everywhere. Everywhere it's going to be good. In some places, it'll cross the margin and actually make it economically beneficial to get one. In places where it already is economically beneficial, just make it even broader. And we need to do a better job of being able to capture that. And it is hard to do for all the reasons we were just mentioning, but we're going to need to be able to get there so that we can start to bring that forward. And eventually, you of course can imagine financing products, something like, there's a company called Sealed that was or is doing a lot of this. But I think ultimately, if there is a real OpEx reduction, that's essentially a finance product, right? That's a problem that you can build some solution to bridge those two things.
That's right. But it is about that spark spread, which is tricky. And Northern California, where you guys are starting, where you and I both live, is a place where the price of electricity has gone up, I think maybe more than anywhere in the country. It's not clear to me, but it's a lot, is the point. Is it a barrier, the price of electricity at this point? Or are we still in the kind of early adopter-ish segment of customers where, look, like, maybe it's hard to tell over the long term, am I going to save money on this or not? But I care about this because of XYZ. It's a better customer experience, no fossil fuels, et cetera.
Yeah, I think this is something where that consumer bias to look at the CapEx more than the OpEx is actually in our favor, because people see the rebates available and they're like, yeah, I want that money. I want that $5,000, $2,000, whatever it is, that comes off the purchase price. And that is usually tied to removing a fossil system. And in some cases, it's capping the gas at the home overall. And so that is driving people on the economic side. And just speaking from my personal experience, yeah, we are still in the early adopter segment, right? So at some point we'll be doing millions and millions of homes. We're not there yet. So we get to still, sell to people who are already at some level bought into a heat pump and they want a product that they want to feel like they're getting the best product possible.
Right. You're in the Roadster phase of market adoption. Model 3 is yet to come.
Roadster to maybe early Model
S. Okay. Yeah. That's fine.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right. So final topic for you is this topic of vertical integration, which Quilt, as you said, is pursuing, right? So you are the OEM of the heat pump. You are the installer of the heat pump. You sell the heat pump. You do all the things. And so you're cutting out all these steps in the value chain. That allows you to deliver this like very seamless customer experience and cut out margin. There's all these benefits of that. Historically, that has also been true in other sectors. The cost of that, of course, is that like the infrastructure to stand up a new market is not insubstantial. So what does that look like for you? Do you need to, if you want to install in Chicago or whatever your next market's going to be, you need to build a workforce there, and you need to hire technicians and train them, and trucks and all that kind of stuff. You need a distribution warehouse. How are you going to do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there is, like I said, like an inherent speed limit if we were to just roll out nationally as fast as, say we had, infinite capital in the bank. We still could only go so fast. How fast you can hire contractors that you're also are confident are going to represent the brand and do the kind of customer experience that we want to see, and stock the warehouses and build the infrastructure and all that. So I'll start off by saying that the reason we did the vertical integration to start with is because of customer experience, but it doesn't have to be the be-all, end-all forever in that you have to know what great looks like before you can hold someone else accountable to it. But there's no reason we can't bring other people into the fold now that we have a good sense of what great looks like. And I often think of it as like franchise restaurants. So if you had a vision for a new fast food burger restaurant and you had a new kind of sandwich you wanted to sell, on day one, you wouldn't go franchise that to a bunch of people just out of an idea. You would build a restaurant. You'd own your own restaurant and you would run it until you really knew that you could deliver that product and that brand experience. And then you could take that system and bring it to other people and give them both the support they needed to deliver it and the management to ensure that they were reaching those bars that you were hoping they will. And that is the vision here. So we will continue to do the vertical integrated thing. And we're going to do that in probably a lot of major metros in the US. But I want everybody to be able to get a Quilt heat pump. We want to accelerate the energy transition. We want to bring a great quality product to everybody. And there's going to be people in rural parts of the country, tier 3 cities. We're probably realistically not going to stand up warehouses there. But we can build systems where we partner with local contractors who are excited about what we're doing and really deliver a differentiated experience through them. And that is kind of the next big challenge. So that is something that we're working on. We're very excited about. But it does take time. I mean, even that takes time, right? You have to build the systems, you have to sign the contractors, you have to train them. Yeah, unfortunately, this isn't like a pure software world where you can just kind of build the best product, put it on the internet, and have your chat GPT moment and be 1 billion users in a few weeks.
Yeah, few of us can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Paul, this is great. Thank you so much for taking the time and for the heat pump.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me on and also for picking Quilt. I appreciate it.
Paul Lambert is the CEO and co-founder of Quilt. This show is a production of Latitude Media. You can head over to latitudemedia.com for links to today's topics. Latitude is supported by Prelude Ventures. Prelude backs visionaries accelerating climate innovation that will reshape the global economy for the betterment of people and planet. Learn more at preludeventures.com. This episode was produced by Daniel Waldorf, mixing by Roy Campanella and Sean Marquand, theme song by Sean Marquand. I'm Shail Khan, and this is Catalyst.